right, let's see what interfaces look like in code. So I've got a new project that I have created here called Interface Intro. I'm going to create a new package, and I'm just going to call it Interfaces. And actually, let's do our reverse domain naming convention. com.interfaces or com.demo.interfaces. That looks about right. All right, cool. So within that package, I'll right click and I'm going to start a new, not a class, actually it's going to be a new interface. All right, so this interface, I'm actually going to copy this code from the platform. So let's look at what we have here. We're going to call it AC Powerable. So that's the name I'm going to give it. And I'm not going to extend any other interfaces. I'm just going to leave it as is. Okay, great. And so it actually, STS is great. It will import that or start you out with the stubs for the interface itself. And really the only difference is the keyword is interface, not class. So I'm just going to copy some code that we have here on the platform and go through a little bit of what it's doing. So right here, I'm going to put those things in there. Okay, so in this AC Powerable interface, we have a few things listed. We have some member variables. Any class that implements this interface will have these voltage and frequency, right? Because it's basically a contract, a list of things that a class needs to have if they're implementing this interface. These two methods here are basically just listing the requirements. They don't actually have any implementations. They're not defined. They're only declared inside of this interface, which just means that if you have any kind of, let's say, electronics that are AC powerable, they are required to implement this unplug method, and they're required to implement this checked plugged in method. And this is very useful because if you see a class or you're working inside of a class that says that it implements AC Powerable, you know that it's going to have that unplugged method and it's going to have that checked plugged in method. So if you're using that class's instances elsewhere, you are guaranteed that you can call this unplug method or call the check plugged in method and it will have been implemented. Now this last method is actually a default method as that's part of the interface AC Powerable, which means that it's already implemented here. So that's the default method. And so if a class that is implementing this interface does not have this method defined, it's okay. And it will just use the code that's listed here in the interface itself. So let's look at an implementation. So let's go down to this part of the platform. And we're actually going to create this heater class. And you'll notice it extends electrical appliance. I'm not going to list that class or go through that class at all. Just know that you can inherit from other classes while simultaneously implementing an interface. Likewise, you can implement many interfaces in one class, but you can only extend or inherit from one class, right? So this is sort of an is-a relationship, the inheritance relationship. So a heater is an electrical appliance. Whereas you can say that a heater is AC powerable, but it isn't an AC powerable. All right, so let's take this code and I will create another file inside the same package. Actually, no, let's create another package because I've called this package interfaces. So I'm going to make a new package and I'm going to call it com. Now this is important. I have com.demo.interfaces, so I'm going to call this com.demo. And for this I'm going to call it models. A model is another name for a class. Later on, when we connect to the database, they will be called models. So I'm going to get in the habit early and call it com.demo.models. Notice this package name does have to be the same preface as com.demo.interfaces here in order for this class to have access to that interface. All right, cool. So I have this new package here. I'm now going to create a new class this time, not an interface, but a traditional class. And we are going to call it heater. And if you were implementing this and you had a code base and you had that electronic device class, you would also inherit, which you can do by tapping this browse button and selecting the class that you want to inherit from, and it will automatically create those stubs for you. I'm not going to do that here because I don't have an electronic device class, but I can add an interface to implement. So from here, if I just search for AC Powerable, it should come up. There we go. Awesome. Okay, cool. So I finish. And you'll notice it actually creates those stubs for me, which is very convenient. So I know that I need to implement this unplug and check plugged in.